If you count the winners and losers in yesterday's election, there were very few surprises. Candidates who were favored in the polls won handily, and the same went for ballot questions. If anything was remarkable, it was the high turnout. That was the case throughout a sharply divided country, but with a more bipartisan flavor in Massachusetts. To help us figure out the message from the voters is the District City Councilor for Jamaica Plain and West Roxbury, Matt O'Malley. Thank you very much for being with us, Councilor.
Great to be with you, Chris.
First of all, what about the turnout? You were impressed by it yesterday. I'm thinking, if not for the people running on the ballot, what were they turning out for?
Well, when I went to vote yesterday morning, I noticed there was already a line that was reminiscent of a presidential election turnout line. This, of course, was an off year. And when I saw the numbers at 3 o'clock, we were about 145,000 Bostonians had voted at that time, which would go on to prove that we would have more than 200,000 voters. That is an exceptional number in an off-year midterm election when there were certainly some hotly contested seats around the country, but in Massachusetts that was more focused on the primaries. So I think it showed a level of civic engagement that really warmed my heart.
Was this a response to Trump? Was it early voting? What do you think?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think early voting is something that is incredibly successful and we should emulate for every election. It allows folks an opportunity to vote early, and we saw some significant numbers take advantage of that. Clearly, there are a lot of Democrats and progressives such as myself who felt extra motivated in light of the last major election and the election of Donald Trump in 2016. So I think that you saw a lot of new people at the polls, people who have felt motivated to get involved, and you just saw numbers across the country that really reflected that.
What about numbers in Boston, at least for Charlie Baker? He didn't carry the city 4 years ago, but yesterday he got more than twice as many votes, and he got almost 50%.
Yeah.
What about that?
No, he did very, very well. In order for a Democratic candidate to win statewide in the Commonwealth, they need to win the city of Boston by 25, 30, 35 percentage points. It was essentially a draw. I was disappointed as someone who supported and supports Jay Gonzalez. I think he ran as good of a campaign as he could have, but clearly the momentum was with Governor Baker, and was borne out in the returns yesterday.
Well, to some extent, it bears out the relationship with Mayor Walsh. It's sort of a reciprocal relationship. They both do things to make each other look good, and that benefits their constituency. But there's some people who probably don't feel altogether comfortable with that. What do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, again, I supported Jay Gonzalez, so I can really only speak to that. I think that we have an opportunity for really forward-thinking leadership in the corner office, and I think that on a whole host of issues, he really addressed that. Having said that, the elections are over, and I think it's always good for people to find common ground and to work together even when they don't agree on things. But in my point of view, we should always be trying to advance a forward-thinking, progressive agenda.
What about Elizabeth Warren's result? She won handily. Does this make much difference about her presidential aspirations, do you think?
It certainly, I think, helps it. She, surprisingly to me, didn't rule out running for president before the election was cast. Typically, candidates are more coy about that question. I think that speaks to, quite frankly, Senator Warren's authenticity, that she was being honest when asked if she would run for president. She had a significant win across the Commonwealth yesterday. While I was disappointed that the Democratic Party didn't win the U.S. Senate, I think we saw some incredible bright spots in the House of Representatives, in some governor's races that we were able to take, and certainly seeing candidates like Elizabeth Warren, the future of this party, doing so well, warmed my Democratic heart.
Well, if there was a real vote for change, it happened in September, and a lot of the change that we're seeing is women.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, it was a little emotional today. Earlier this afternoon, we were at the council meeting, and my seatmate, Ayanna Pressley, it's one of her final meetings before she becomes Congresswoman-elect Pressley, I should say now. She is part of a class of more than 100 women. There will be more than 100 women serving in the United States House of Representatives for the first time ever. That is a very, very good thing. I think you saw a lot of energy from the Women's March, early on, from other events of women getting involved in office and running and taking on the status quo, so to speak, taking on the establishment, as Congresswoman-elect Pressley did. And it is a big loss for the city of Boston, but a huge gain for the Commonwealth and for the country.
Looking back on her run for Congress, what I was impressed by was the bandwagoning effect here, because she had some of her colleagues in the council that were getting out. I mean, it sort of sent a signal that she is to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that she was a strong candidate by virtue of the fact that she won by nearly 20 points. And I think, to his credit, Congressman Capuano always thought that and worked his heart out, knowing what a strong candidate she would be. But she showed tremendous courage in taking on a well-liked and popular longtime incumbent, knowing that, I remember talking to her early on, knowing that some people who would have been with her in prior campaigns wouldn't be this time, knowing that if she lost, she could seriously hurt her political career down the line. But she rolled the dice. She worked hard. She worked smart. She had a significant victory in September, was obviously unopposed yesterday, but in 2 months she'll be taking her seat as the first woman of color elected to the House of Representatives in Massachusetts history.
This is BNN News. We're talking with City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Councilor, looking at the national picture in Congress, Boston's a microcosm of what we see there. More women in Congress, and of course Democrats in majority. What do you expect from this now?
Well, I think, as we've seen in the Boston City Council, which better reflects the vibrancy and the diversity of the city than at any time in history, quite frankly, we're seeing a good group of folks who can work together and get things done and move the city forward. I think that will be better reflected certainly in the House of Representatives. I think it's also important to note that many members of Congress from the Commonwealth are likely to assume significant chairmanships in the new Congress, and that will benefit the state. And that's something that, whether you're a Democratic or Republican or independent voter, if you live in the Bay State, you should be very excited about that.
Well, one thing that we're still recovering from is the toxic, divisive climate leading up to this election. Trump can point to what happened in the Senate and said, look, all my emphasis on the caravan paid off. But if you look at the House, what's your mix on this?
I think some have suggested that it was a split decision. I don't quite buy into that. There were certainly some heartbreaking losses in the Democratic Party, chiefly Andrew Gillum, Beto O'Rourke, and several others, as well as some good incumbents like Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Donnelly, who lost their seats. But seeing the breadth and depth of victory at the House, as well as some significant wins in governor's mansions in Kansas, Wisconsin, so many other states that voted reliably for Donald Trump for president, are now back as sort of the quote-unquote blue wall, or likely showing a chance for a Democratic candidate to do well. That buoys my spirits. There is toxicity from our national discourse, and I lay that blame at Donald Trump's feet. As Democrats, we have an opportunity, I think, to fight for what we believe in a better, stronger position from now on, and I'm hopeful that will result in our taking back the White House in 2020.
And finally, the pundits say at least parts of your district have become the real hotspot for voter turnout. Why is that?
I think it's a very engaged electorate. It's a very engaged citizenry. It's folks who pay attention and follow these things and want to have their voices heard. I haven't seen the final numbers from Boston, but I can tell you from visiting various polling locations in West Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, Rosendale, back of Mission Hill, and Roxbury yesterday, we saw a really engaged electorate, and that's something that we should celebrate. It was really heartwarming to see a great turnout of voters throughout the city of Boston, and particularly in my district.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
District 6 City Councilor Matt O'Malley. We'll have more news in just a moment.